Hi, how's it going? This is Resident of Collarwood for YouTube. Back to continue my read along of the Dark Shadows Daybook Unbound, Chapter 4, Episode 764. What's in the cards? Can Barnabas stop Quentin, or will an ultimate assassin bring a new shadow of death to Collinsport? Tim, Don Briscoe. Barnabas attempts to learn the identity of the werewolf as he tracks down the silversmith who made the amulet, a protection that will one day be found in the 1960s. Evan Evan tests Tim's programming as an assassin, and Beth, reluctant to out Quentin to Barnabas, has the choice removed as the choice removed when he bites her. As the episode ends, Barnabas again bites someone to place them under his control, reminding viewers that he uses his abilities to strategic ends as much as to feed. Would he even would he have been this cavalier in the 1960s? He's used this advantage twice in the space of a week or so. As much as I feel sorry for Beth, who ends up being a pawn of Quentin, Barnabas, and Pitofe, it's nice to see her current new master so confinedly on a mission. It's an increasing level of chutzpah. Would he have had it a year before, meaning 71 years ahead, perhaps? Then, in the future, he recalls how he will be chasing Adam around with a gun, but certainly not in 1967, as he slyly swipes blood slides and works to revive the mind of Josette. Prior still, in 1795, his reactions are almost entirely reactive and based on following or defiling the codes of the day, like the two-blooded, red-fisted heroes before and after him. This time, Barnabas Collins makes his own rules. This time, it's personal. This time, he's bringing his Vagoda. He also tells a young Abe Vagoda that he'll have a bright future. Kind of, I mean. I wish in a beautiful nod to continually young Ezra Braithwaite, played by Edward Marshall, whose Harry Johnson popped up in episode 669, reappears for the very first time to make the pentagram, that he'll die for an episode in an episode 685. If that makes sense, by the late 1960s, the fully developed Ezra was played by future nighttime TV hunk Abe Vigoda. Even though Vigoda is not in this episode, he's a well-crafted minor character in the DSU. And Vigoda gives a touching performance, but he's not in this one, so sue me. However, Edward Marshall is, and he's good too. The rest of the episode that's not about Barnabas trying to beat up the fleas off Quentin is devoted to Humbert Allen Ostrato and Don Briscoe starring in the first remake of The Manchurian Candidate. This is where 1897's Helza Popin approach to storytelling starts to consume itself with too much ideas thrown around too frantically. Frantically. You can feel the generous creativity oozing from every corner of the show, but perhaps there is so much going on that you increase the opportunity for a bad idea to slip through. Dark Shadows is known for borrowing. Is that the right word? It seeks inspiration from many sources, reprocessing them for a different era and audience. And with the depth and dynamicism of a soap, it arguably does some of them a service, but most of these are pretty old. Or in the case of the Leviathan, lifted Lovecraft at least felt pretty old. But the very liberal borrowing from the recent film and novel of the Manchurian Candidate is the strangest quoting ever executed by the writing staff. A guy gets a whammy to play cards until a specific card triggers the urge to kill. Same thing. It even feels stranger because it's that rare case of the show taking a modern story that verges on science fiction and plunging it into the past. Dark Shadows defined itself by going in the opposite direction and confronting contemporary characters with the dangers of custom dramas. In the case of the Tim Shaw storyline, it accomplishes the plot object, but with too much winking when a quoted idea, whether for the sake of satire or not, exists to be recognized more than to be revisited and reconsidered. It's not a shining moment. I disagree. I mention it here, not to bury Dark Shadows, but to praise it. Out of 450 of storylines, it may be the one fumbled missteps regarding the issue of storytelling by pastiche consisting the smallest fraction of the show's screen time. Exceptions do prove rules. This episode hit the airwaves May 29th, 1969, episode 765. As Barnabas pumps Beth for information, will Magda pump Quentin full of silver bullets? She's locked, loaded, and ready to say I'm sorry 6 times in a row. Alex Stevens, Quentin Collins. With a wolf on the prowl, Barnabas knows that Beth holds the key to its secret. Barnabas bites her, and she informs him that the wolf is Quentin, and that Quentin has a legacy he doesn't even know about. 2 children, Magda, rifle with remorse, hunts the wolf as the wolf stalks the estate. Finally, Magda shoots the wolf, but fatally. It would be inaccurate and hyperbolic for me to say this episode is pure action. So I will for Dark Shadows. This is pure action. And if Dark Shadows action has a name other than Thayer David, it's Alex Stevens. We owe him a lot. He performed several spectacular falls in this one, on par with his astonishingly Marvel Comics explosion through the Evans cottage window early in the series. His greatest stunt may have been involved padding on the floor, but I didn't see it, and the sudden reality of it is stunning. On the attack, the werewolf leaps over the railing on the second-story landing on the foyer, lands, and keeps going. If you own an ankle, you realize what an impressive stunt this is. Simply, in its blunt reliability, it's a straightforward moment, and it may be the most magical sight on the show because special effects are clearly unreal, even at their most realistic. They are inherently devoid of wonder. The great Ray Harryhausen may be a magnificent artist and technician, but magician he ain't. Even even when his work defines state of the art, the herky jerky movement and weirdness of scale immediately told you to start using euphemisms like heightened later on, lest you be harassed by his devotees. Magic is different. Magic shows the impossible as possible and leaves as the only conclusion. This happened at the point apologies to the makeup crew. Stevens could have gotten away with no appliances at all. Just a t-shirt that said werewolf, and we'd be sold. It's a moment of sudden wonder, and suddenly, from the floor up, Collinwood stops being symbolic of anything and becomes a real place. It taped today, but it played on Friday, May 30th. And I think that's a symbolic day. It's a good day to bring in a werewolf at his most exciting. And I hope the choice was strategic. This was, for many, the last day of school for 3 glorious months in the past 3 days. Jonathan Frid and David Selby had recorded their contributions to the album, original music from Dark Shadows, which would become a massive hit in the year of massive hits. Viewmaster reels were steady sellers. It was the year of the Barnabas Collins Dark Shadows board game, and this one action packed, exposition packed installment slammed the locker door on school for the best part of the best year of the best show that millions of kids had ever seen. It was the last day they had to run home from anywhere to see it, and the writers ensured that the marathon mattered. It certainly feels as if there is more screen time for Stevens than any other episode of the program. Dark Shadows may have very well been at its zenith. Ratings and demographics were measured differently then, and so I can't state anything definitively about who was watching. My instinct tells me that given the items for sale and the significance of the day, this may be one of the most enjoyed episodes of the entire series. It was certainly the most meaningful for a nation of kids. I don't need anthropology data to back me up on that. A great episode, certainly mature, thank goodness. No, you have Bat's Beth with a vampire's dream of an endless neck, bitten and controlled. Barnabas learns of Quentin's curse, the children, and finally, what he's doing in 1897 at all. The last part of is the vegetables of the episode, but at least there's cheese sauce. The enlightenment of Barnabas Collins has been coming for months and months, and you know the writers are planning something big when they finally plug in the light bulb over his head. Now, equipped with as much of the truth as anyone knows, the adventure of 1897 should be concluding. Barnabas should be climbing into the coffin for the voyage home. Of course, a certain Count is about to hear that a certain body part is waiting for him in Collinsport, and if stuntman Alex Stevens is magic, the Count is sorcery. This episode hit the airwaves May 30th, 1969. Episode 771, when brings home his shocking true love, everyone at Collinwood needs to take a shot. Probably of penicillin. Carl Collins, John Carr. As Barnabas and Beth plan to find the undead Dirk Wilkins to distract Edward, Carl interrupts with his vaguely cockney fiancee, the alleged medium and music hall embarrassment, Pansy Faye. Her display of second sight ends with an occasion that one of the Collinses will be knit up in Dirk's death later. Barnabas returns to the old house where he finds her bitten and collapsed. Dark Shadows is about as self contained as a pair of fishnets on the open day of Pritkin Camp, and that makes it murder to introduce the prospective viewers to prospective viewers. No, this one isn't self contained, but it comes very close, beginning with vampire on vampire suspense and ending in the murder of a character we meet just a few minutes before. It's a hilarious little jewel that is inarguably pure comedy, as Jonathan Frid gets the easy job and big payoffs of being astonished take after take. The heavy lifting is done by an especially histrionic John Carlin, and then Kay Fry. As his Alfred Doolittle of a fiance, the psychic medium Pansy Faye, Barnabas is at the height of his swashbuckling best, with Beth at his side as he plots to foil Edward by revealing Dirk as the local vampire. This week, with cosmic inevitability, the Endeavor is halted mid-bat pole by Carl, blistering of salt water, taffy, and true love. It's a great summation of a universe that encourages heroism and then mocks us with its ridiculousness. Think you're going to help the community while your social equals look on in disgust, apathy? Don't worry, the community you're there to help will soon arrive to make the effort look pointless. Class envy is an ugly thing, and envy isn't even the right word. Envy goes from the bottom up, from the top down. C. Collins, Judith. Pansy Faye is exactly the sort of figure designed like a xenomorph by a predator for her to hunt. I like that. You can almost hear the thermographic scan kicking when she catches sight of the crassly cacophonic strumpet. The episode does a funny thing when they meet because it allows you to see the conflict from both perspectives at once. Judith is a snobbish and intolerant prig, and it's in response to a boorish sense of entitlement, the one that completely betrays comp- the promise of humble, respectful, good values that the working class claim when it wants to be offended into getting something. Unless a Vanderbilt were tuning in, no viewer then or now knows what it is like to be a Collins. Just 3 generations away from Joshua, but Pansy Faye's brash idiocy with the gibbering Carl as ambassador kind of inspires everyone to feel like a Collins, and it's a subtle lesson in taste and aesthetic for everyone willing to peek into the mirror. We've been spoiled by Vicky's example to see female outsiders to Clan Collins as position a purity of spirit often lacked by the decadently corrupt residents, but that changes too. If you've seen the series before, you know that Pansy Faye's spirit possesses Charity Trask, largely because it gave Nancy Barrett something interesting to do. And Dan Curtis was suffering under a curse that compelled him to make America listen to I Want to Dance with You to an extent that almost makes us long for London Bridge. Under the Barrett administration, the United States of pansy changes as drastically as it can, on ushering in a new character. Was this planned? Was this a response to the writers owning the part for a familiar actor's strengths? I have no idea, and the why is irrelevant. She warms and humanizes as a character. And we can credit Death for that. Go down as Kay Fry, come up as Nancy Barrett. A lot of nuance on the way. It's not the only place this happens in the series. On Dark Shadows, death isn't an end, it's just a cue for transformation. The show begins the historic gatekeeping mumbo jumbo surrounding the transformative nature of death and makes it literal enough that the rest of us unenlightened slobs might get some practical use out of it. Every culture kills its youth to one extent or another in the form of liminal rituals like hazing and walkabouts, where the prior identity is removed. A form of symbolic death is imposed, and an adult magically pops out the other end. This is a constant theme of Dark Shadows, starting with Liz Stoddard more or less killing her youthful married identity and cocooning for a couple of decades before emerging in the smart red dress she wears to bail Carolyn out the can. Vicky passes through death, kind of, in 1795. Adam is nothing without the death certificate he brings with him when he applies for fast food jobs. Quentin, of course, only in Collinsport does a vest rent for more coffins and cars, but the king, predictably, is Barnabas, who dies with a greater regularity than South Park's Kenny. Each time he rises, which is arguably at the crack of dusk every night, he transforms, sometimes wiser, sometimes more impulsive, inevitably a tad on the hungry side, even if we only count his transitions between humanity and para-humanity. That's still six ping pongs between the worlds on a strictly symbolic level. He simply has that much learning to do for Barnabas. The story of Dark Shadows isn't Dracula, it's Groundhog Day. We see that down to various rituals of renovating the old house and agreeing with Joan Bennett that, yeah, the resemblance to the portrait sure is weird, and now I need the keys to the old house because Lowe's is delivering like a metric ton of backsplash tiles. And if I'm not there when they arrive, they'll take them back and restock them, and I'll have to send the gypsies to Logansport to straighten it out. And I think we know how that'll go. On a show that constantly makes itself in varied cycles, this is more the most primal of all, and it often smells exactly like you might think on Dark Shadows. Transformation isn't a mandate, but it is a fact. Sometimes, as with Pansy Faye, it's the result of a terrible, unfunny practical joke. Sometimes it's a punishment. Sometimes it makes no sense at all. Often I don't even see the characters learn from it. They don't need to. Not as long as we learn the lesson. Sometimes that lesson is to value the changes like we see with Pansy Faye. Sometimes the lesson is to hold fast to what hasn't changed with Barnabas. It's a matter of knowing the difference. This episode hit the airwaves June 9th, 1969. Let's see. Okay. Episode 780. Can Barnabas stop Carl from bringing about the end of Collinwood before Trask brings about the end of Barnabas? Quentin, David Selby. Carl alerts Trask to the threat of Barnabas, the vampire now allied with a Quentin who knows and accepts his secret, removes the evidence of his coffin before going on to kill Carl to save the future. Trask confronts Barnabas, and the two men await the telling dawn. Sam Hall, such an ear for dramatic dialogue, properly theatrical yet always true, his plots are modulated with a pace as organic as the human heartbeat. Characters distinct, payoffs rich, yet always unpredictable. As much as I admire the exquisite writing, exquisite writing of Sam Hall, or of Gordon Russell, Sam Hall is the undisputed master of Collingwood, and his best scripts expand beyond the needs of writing Dark Shadows and take on a storytelling voice that had the resonant resonance of art. Immediate, yes, written briskly and under incredible demands to produce, rather than excuse his work. These facts make it all the more remarkable in episode 780. His skill for economy melds seamlessly with the language of the characters, the substance of their climactic exchanges, and the propulsive risk inherent in the story. But simply, he is a poet who gets out of his own way. The star of this episode is the brutal and brisk execution of Carl Collins. Carl's fears and desires are understandable, and considering the threat of learning that a strange relative is a ravenous undead engine of murder, not necessarily unwarranted, we let Carl's prior extremity and histrionics too easily overtake the fact that at least his panic is justified. In killing Carl, Barnabas trades the life of one Collins for many. If Barnabas goes, so do Quentin and David, and who knows who else. It's time for this story to step outside the pleasant, slow burn of the soap opera model, own up to its own stakes, and make things happen. Quentin accepts Barnabas for who he is. Carl is an understandable casualty of brass tacks, and Trask faces down Barnabas with a bold fidelity to his faith. It's a four-man powerhouse of storytelling. Each character evolves and takes chances that define and redefine themselves. Barnabas reclaims the full sense of strategy that establishes him on his release in 1967, with his values in line with something larger than addressing his immediate pain and loss. He even dares tries to saddle him with Carl's murder, a rousing gesture, but an irrelevant one because Trask, justified in his hunt, has him dead to rights. Despite the paucity of eyewitnesses' evidence, when Barnabas shrinks from his cross, there is no proof that matters. Those fine points of who didn't see what are all words under the reality of the Democlan sunrise. Quentin does his part as well, and this episode is a microcosmic portrait of both his overall journey and what makes him the series' second protagonist. Yet he never loses his essential gift for gall. He goes from melancholic repose with his companion music to smugly condescending to Trask's self-serving sense of justice. From there, he sets aside fear to see Barnabas for the man within the monster, and even collaborates to cover Carl's death with a frighteningly unsettling show of theatrical relish, not just enacting the con, but reveling in it. Jonathan Frid, David Selby, Jerry Lacey, and John Carlin, in his final turn as Carl, is his most unusual character, all seem to know that this is an episode of substance and almost rambunctious, driven meaning for the characters. Like he written the inflames, like the writing that inflames the installment, there is a confidence in their acting. Each man, undistracted, performs with the honest solidarity of performers who knew their characters and take them to inevitable destinations. The sense of inevitability is not an end, Carl excluded, but a beginning. Each man has a mandate to reveal his ultimate essence, and what result is like a series of Rorschach bloats that unfold with the unrecognizable universality of a tarot deck. 3 years after filming began, 770 was captured on the soundstage. Dark Shadows has gone from a take of ambiguity and anxiety in a dark domestic expanse to a tight chambered piece which each player defines himself with finality and yet, above all possibility, always possibility, except Carl. Except for Carl. This episode hit the airwaves June 20th, 1969. All right, guys, I'm going to stop right there because I got to get my kids up for school and get them off to school. All right, guys, I'll be back later. You have a good day.